You've always wanted to own your favorite arcade machine, but where do you get one? The maintenance on them is probably a nightmare, not to mention they are heavy as hell. All things I hear when on the topic of owning arcade machines. But the number one thing is they must be incredibly expensive, right? You gotta be rich to own one. Well, in this video, I'm gonna tell you a little story that might change your mind. In fact, it might just blow your mind. So if you grew up in the 80s or 90s, you likely spent a lot of time at arcades, just dumping quarters into machines like this. I know I did, and I became obsessed at an early age because of this machine. But that's not why we're here. I'm gonna share with you how I got the very first arcade machine in my collection, why I have that machine, and the crazy story of how much I paid or didn't pay for this machine. All in all, I have about 20 machines in my collection, and I would like to eventually do videos like this for every single one of them, and then we can put all those videos together in one big, long, epic game room tour that you guys have all been asking for. That'd be kind of fun, right? Unfortunately, not all of them are currently working, but that's a topic that we will touch on a little bit later in this video. The reason for this video is the very first machine I ever got. Why Final Fight? Well, I don't know if you played a lot of Final Fight, but Final Fight was a beat 'em up released by Capcom back in 1989 in arcades. But in the early 90s, they also released it on the Super NES. Now, fun little fact about Final Fight, it was actually designed by Capcom for the Street Fighter franchise. This originally was intended to be a Street Fighter game until it was turned into this beat 'em up. So back when I was a kid, there was a publication called the Penny Saver. I think these magazines or newspapers were nationwide, but it was basically a free publication that you flipped through, and it was basically like classified ads. People would advertise all kinds of stuff in it, and I'm pretty sure it was free at grocery stores and stuff. You could even get it shipped to your house. I was browsing through the Penny Saver, and I found an ad for somebody selling an arcade machine. Had a phone number in it, so I called the gentleman and I asked him, hey, I would love to buy an arcade machine. He proceeds to tell me that he has a wide variety of arcade machines, and that if I really wanted one, I should come down to his place and look at everything that he had. And I thought, that seems kind of weird, but okay, he was close enough by. So I grabbed my brother's truck and I drove down to this gentleman's warehouse. When I got there, he lifted up this roll-up door on a storage unit, and there were 100 arcade machines in there. I thought to myself, oh my God, this guy's smuggling arcade machines. But it turns out he was actually an operator. If you're unfamiliar with what an operator is, it's somebody who went out and bought just hundreds of arcade machines, and then he was the dude who would put them at laundromats, pizza parlors, all those places, and then they would go around once a week and collect all the change. Back in the 80s, it was a good income, but this was the late 90s and the arcades had crashed, so he was looking to get rid of everything. The first thing that caught my eye was Final Fight. I knew just from seeing the cabinet that this wasn't an original cabinet. Let me explain what that means. This is what you would call a conversion. This arcade cabinet here was not originally a Final Fight. In fact, I'm pretty sure this originally was a Stargate. So if we sanded all the paint and stuff off the sides, my guess is the Stargate artwork would still be on there. If you don't remember Stargate I think was a Williams arcade machine. But it had been converted to Final Fight. This is something that a lot of operators would do. A new game would come out and they would order what's called a kit. That gives you a marquee, it usually gives you a bezel, and sometimes a control overlay and a new board. And for those of you who don't know, arcade machine boards are actually really easy to swap out. Let me show you. This here is an arcade board. It's a JAMA board, Mortal Kombat. And all you do is pull the harness off the top here and pop the harness on and bingo, you got a new game. It's almost like swapping out a cartridge in a video game console. So operators would do this quite frequently, which means you would end up with arcade machines that didn't have the original game inside. This was one of them. Although this is what I would consider a pretty decent conversion. It had the control panel overlay, the bezel, and the marquee. And when I got there, it was plugged in, and I could see that it was completely working. So I walked up to it, and I started playing it, and it just brought back so many memories of my brother and I playing this game in the early 90s. So of course I was like, this is the one that I want. How much do you want for this? I'll take 50 bucks. And my mind was like blown. 50 bucks? He says, but there's a catch. And I'm like, oh, of course there's a catch. He says, I'll sell you this machine for 50 bucks, but you have to take that machine also. And he points over to this machine that didn't have a monitor in it. I could see all the way through it. It had a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles marquee on it, and it had no artwork on the sides. But he said, you buy this one for 50 bucks, but you have to take that one also. And this is when I realized he was about this close to throwing these things away. They were very close to going to the dump. And truth be told, if I would have had any more room in my brother's truck, I probably would have saved more than just two of the machines. So for 50 bucks, I walked away with a Final Fight that was completely working, mind you, and an empty cabinet, which I eventually put a TV in and an NES and made it like a playable faux NES arcade machine. I thought it was really cool at the time. I was so damn excited to be owning my own arcade machine. So I took these two machines home. I immediately started digging through these, and here's the stuff that I did to this machine. Come check this out. Now keep in mind, I had no idea what I was doing. I had never messed with, repaired, or even tinkered on an arcade machine before. One of the things I knew I wanted to do was change the T-molding. T-molding is this molding that you see running down. It's really easy to change. You can order it on Amazon. So I thought, oh, I'll do white highlights. I really wasn't all that keen on, trying to convert it back to original. So I just wanted to customize it. This is what I did. I bought white T-molding for the whole thing. Now that I think about it, I don't know. I guess I've been looking at it for 25 years or whatever, and it doesn't seem that strange anymore. But white T-molding was certainly an interesting choice. The next thing I did to match the white T-molding is I took the change door off and painted just the frame of the change door white to match the T-molding. Then I painted the front of the cabinet black. They used to have all these arcade machines have these big holes on them. Those are where the crossbars were, because back in the day, there could easily be a couple $100 in change in these things. So people would put these big crossbars and padlocks on them. Just about every arcade machine that you see is going to have these. At least I've filled a lot of them in over the years. But machines that were actually working machines in arcades have these. So I painted the whole thing black. I changed out the lights in the marquee. And then I had a friend who had a Final Fight arcade machine. And he was like, dude, I got side art. I've been saving this side art. So he gave me this crusty old side art. It's been on there forever. I never did a really good job at really gluing it down, because he had it on his Final Fight and he peeled it off and gave it to me. But both sides actually have, you can see it over here, this crusty old side art. I don't know, maybe one day I'll try and glue this stuff down. But for the most part, this Final Fight is still, to this day, in really good shape. Now, if you saw an original Final Fight, you'd see this is not the original cabinet style. Again, like I said, this is a Stargate. It's a Final Fight conversion. Now, I would say still to this day, in my collection, Final Fight is still one of my favorite machines to just play through. If you've never played through an arcade machine on free play, there's actually not really a lot going on there. If you have unlimited lives, you can play through Final Fight in about 35 minutes. Owning one of these does sort of break the immersion. Now, I am shooting this on my cell phone, and I'm using my native video app to shoot this. So as you've noticed, probably the screen here is jogging a little bit. That's because if I were using an alternative app and I set the frame rate of my phone to either 30 or 60 frames, this wouldn't happen. But currently I have my phone set to 24 frames. Image-wise, I just think it looks a little more filmic, but it also means these screens jog. The other reason I'm pointing that out is because if you've noticed, this picture is a bit washed out. This is the original monitor that I got in this machine. God, that was a 90, that had to have been 1998. Now, I actually don't keep these machines on too often. All the machines that are behind my desk that I shoot at are usually off when I'm shooting because it can get pretty noisy in here. Everything behind me I usually keep on. But that does mean they're being turned on and turned off, you know, probably at least 2 to 3 times a day, which puts some wear on the monitors. And as I mentioned earlier, the maintenance on owning arcade machines can be fairly high. I'm replacing or repairing parts in these 20 some odd arcade machines probably at least a couple times a year. The final fight is going to have to be recapped. Good news, I probably don't have to buy a new CRT, which is great because CRTs are not only incredibly hard to find, but pretty expensive these days. I'll probably just be able to recap it, which if you know how to do, actually doesn't really cost you that much. You know, it costs you your time and it might cost you about 30 bucks in parts. Now, Final Fight, and especially this Final Fight here, have a very, very special place in my heart for obvious reasons. Not just because my brother and I used to play it all the time, but because it was actually the first arcade machine that I ever got. And at the time, I thought I was getting a super deal. But if you stick around to the channel and subscribe, you're going to hear even crazier stories than that. Because if you think 50 bucks is cheap, once I found out that there were people just looking to offload these machines, I went on like an arcade bender. I would say it almost became a problem to the point where when I was looking at places to rent or buy when I was moving, I always had to have a spare room or a grand room or living room to convert into an arcade. I did say even though Final Fight was my first, it was not what actually got me into the arcades. That award goes to Miss Pac-Man over here. That's a story that I've told once before, and if you are unfamiliar with it, you should watch that video right here. If you want to see the rest of the collection that I have here, you should subscribe right here because I'm going to drop videos like this every week.